Hello. Welcome to Alaska Common Ground's Forum on the Marijuana Initiative. Thanks for coming out here tonight for this initiative, which is on the ballot on the November 4th general election ballot. Thanks for coming out on a nice night. I'm Cliff Groh. I'm chair of Alaska Common Ground. I want to thank our sponsors of this event tonight: the Anchorage Public Library, the League of Women Voters of Alaska, the League of Women Voters of Anchorage, and Alaska Integrated Media, home of Valley News Talk, KVNT, and Hot Talk KON, AM 1080. I want to thank, and I see one of their hosts, Eddie Berg, here tonight, who's come to the third, and come to all three of the four Alaska Common Ground forums on the ballot propositions we're holding this summer. This, as I said, is our third. Next week, on Wednesday evening, August 13th, we're having a forum on the Bristol Bay Forever Initiative. And I look forward to seeing all your happy faces again next Wednesday night. And then, folks, we're not stopping there. On Saturday, October 4th, we're having a forum all day long on Alaska's fiscal future. Saturday, October 4th, hope to see you there as well. And I know what you're thinking. I look in your eyes and you say, Cliff, how can I learn more about this? Glad you asked. If you look at www.akcommonground.org, you can get all the details on all our forums and all our future events. And also learn, if you didn't donate on your way in, how you can donate to our fine organization, our fine nonpartisan, nonprofit organization devoted to helping Alaskans understand the major issues facing our state and perhaps even reaching common ground. You can also become a member. And what I hear, folks, if you go on that website, you can become a member for a mere $35 a year. It's almost embarrassing how low it is, but it's a fact. So www.akcommonground.org. I want to introduce our distinguished speakers tonight. We have four of them. On the yes side, the man in the red tie, we have Taylor Bickford, advisor and spokesperson for Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol in Alaska. And in the seat next to him, we have a substitute. Substituting for Bill Parker tonight, we have Tim Hinterberger. Dr. Tim Hinterberger teaches neuroscience, developmental biology, and molecular biology at the University of Alaska Anchorage, where he also conducts research on vertebrate molecular embryology and writes and reviews articles for peer-reviewed scientific journals. Dr. Hinterberger moved to Alaska 22 years ago with his wife, Kat, after receiving his PhD from the University of Illinois, Urbana, and doing postdoctoral research at the University of Michigan and Purdue University. Tim has been a leading figure in Alaska marijuana policy reform for nearly 15 years. Tim and a group of advocates in Alaska wrote ballot measure number 2 in the spring of 2013 and formed a group to support its passage. He currently serves as chair of the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol in Alaska. On the no side, we have Deborah Williams, a former executive director of the Alaska Lung Association and also a co-founder of Big Marijuana, Big Mistake, Vote No on 2. And next to her, we have Kristina Woolston, also with the organization Big Marijuana, Big Mistake, Vote No on 2, and a executive of an Alaska Native corporation. And tonight, as our moderator, we have veteran Alaska broadcaster Steve McDonald. Take it away, Steve.
Thank you, Cliff. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight. And we also want to thank all the folks who are listening via the web on 1080koan.com up in the valley. Also, there will be an audio recording on the Alaska Common Ground website of this event. So if you want to go over some information that perhaps you missed or wanted to hear again or share it with friends, you can go at akcommonground.org, and that'll be up, I think, tomorrow, certainly a little bit later on this week. So welcome to the Alaska Common Ground Forum on the Marijuana Legalization Initiative. It's also known as ballot measure number 2, The initiative will appear on the November general election ballot. It'll be up to voters, such as yourself, to decide if marijuana should be legalized for recreational use. Right now, smoking weed is illegal in Alaska, and because it is, no one would ever think of smoking marijuana in Alaska, because it's illegal, right? Right, Kevin? Actually, Alaska has a rather unique relationship with marijuana. Sometimes it's downright confusing. It began straightforward enough when smoking pot was illegal. But in 1972, Alaskans approved an amendment to the state constitution that guaranteed all of us a very strong right to privacy. Computer data systems were in their infancy then, and it was feared that technology could be used to intrude into the lives of Alaskans. So Section 22 of the Constitution was adopted, giving Alaskans a right to privacy. Pretty intuitive of the folks back then. 3 years later, the new law was tested in court, but it had nothing to do with electronic eavesdropping. A guy named Erwin Raven wanted to know if the right to privacy included possession of marijuana. Raven, who was an attorney, put a bunch of weed in the back seat of his car and decided to speed through Anchorage. And sure enough, sooner or later, an Anchorage police officer spotted him, stopped him, saw the weed in the back seat, and arrested the guy. So Raven goes off to jail. But he decided he was going to take his case to court, and it wound up before the Alaska State Supreme Court. Raven versus the state was the first case in which the Alaska Supreme Court would define the contours of the right to privacy. Raven argued that the law banning possession of marijuana violated the state's privacy law. Raven won his case. Now, according to Jason Brandeis of the University of Alaska Anchorage Justice Center, quote, the court said, well, we don't think marijuana is so dangerous that we can stop adults from using and possessing small amounts in the privacy of their homes. The problem was, what's a small amount? Several years later, the legislature decided a small amount was 4 ounces. Alaskans could possess and smoke up to 4 ounces of marijuana in their own homes. But another problem existed. How are Alaskans going to obtain the drug? That was the big question. It was still against the law to buy it. Maybe you could grow a small amount of weed in your house, but still, no one said exactly how you could obtain those 4 ounces of marijuana for use in your own home. And while the state Supreme Court said you can have a small amount in your home, and the legislature said that amount is 4 ounces, there was still the issue of federal law, where possession and use of marijuana was illegal. The conflict between privacy rights and marijuana deepened even further in 1990 when Alaskan voters went to the polls and decided to recriminalize marijuana once again. The gray area between Raven and the criminal law lingered for 13 years when once again the court stepped in. The Court of Appeals ruled that you can't overturn a Supreme Court decision with a ballot initiative, so the initiative was tossed out. In 1998, there was another vote of the people. This time, voters approved marijuana use for medicinal reasons. Perhaps sensing that attitudes were changing, advocates for recreational marijuana use placed initiatives legalizing weed on the ballot in 2000 and then again in 2004. But each time, voters said no. Once again, Jason Brandeis of UAA told me in an interview several months ago that it is unique and that we've seen every aspect of government, the courts, the legislature, and citizens' initiatives going in different directions on this issue. Now, a decade since the last voter initiative went down to defeat, advocates for recreational use are once again trying to get it legalized. And that brings us to tonight. A little bit of history to kind of get you up to date, and now we have this evening. We have 4 panel members, 2 from each side, who will present arguments for and against Proposition 2. Cliff introduced you to them and gave you a little bit of their biographies so you know who they are and what they stand for. I can tell you about the format right now. The format we'll be operating under this evening is each panelist will get 7 minutes to make a presentation, an opening presentation. And then we'll spend about an hour or so with questions from each side. Those questions will come from Alaska Common Ground, members of our audience, and I'll throw a few in myself to get us started. You'll get 2 minutes to answer each question. You can tag team it, split it up a little bit, or designate one of the other two to answer the question in its entirety. We have a timekeeper, the most important man of the night. His name is Kevin. Kevin, raise your hand. There you are. This is very high tech. We have cards, and Kevin will let you know just how much time you have, and when it gets down to nubs there, please wrap it up. So with that, let's get going. We're going to start with Tim Hinterberger of the Vote Yes side. Sir, you have 7 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming here tonight. I'm the chair of the campaign to regulate marijuana like alcohol in Alaska. And over the course of the campaign so far, I've been asked a number of times, why is a medical school professor promoting drug policy reform? And, you know, it really goes back to when I was a kid growing up in the Chicago suburbs, comfortable middle-class life. One of the first things I encountered personally that struck me as hypocrisy and unjust was marijuana prohibition. And I told myself that if I ever got to a position where I could do something about it, I would speak out. So really, I'm keeping a promise I made to my younger self. I've been involved in this issue here in Alaska pretty much as long as I've been up here. I was, as mentioned, involved a little bit in the 2000 initiative campaign. In 2004, when it was on the ballot again, I was a volunteer spokesperson for that campaign. Anybody remember what the percentage we got in that? It was 44.4%, which seemed good, but it was clear that we weren't making a lot of headway, so we kind of sat back and waited a number of years to see what was happening nationally. And especially after the initiatives passed in Colorado and Washington, it seemed like time was ripe to move on it again. So a number of us here in Alaska, myself, other people who had been involved in the past, Bill Parker, former Deputy Commissioner of Corrections, is another member of the Initiative Committee. Mary Reff, a longtime Alaskan. A number of other people, Jason Brandeis, got together, talked about some initiative language together with people who have some national experience, and most importantly, some of the people who worked on the very successful Colorado initiative. And we'll talk a little bit later just how successful that has been. So it really seemed like the time was ripe to take this to the people once again. I'm not sure which button I'm supposed to push here. There we go. Has anybody been reading the series of editorial articles in the New York Times the last 10 days about they come out in favor of marijuana legalization at the national level? This is one of several figures from that series of articles that I'll be using. And it shows some of the recent history of public opinion on the marijuana legalization nationally. So it's clear that recently we have kind of reached a tipping point where finally a majority of people who were polled, and this is true both nationally and in Alaska, support regulation of marijuana. But when you look at this history, it makes you wonder, you know, what's the cause of this trajectory? Why did it start so low? And if you really want to go back to the beginning, ask yourself, why was marijuana made illegal in the first place? Was it because there was an epidemic of crime and overdoses caused by it? Well, anybody who knows the history, and I hope a lot of you here do, knows that that really wasn't true. Here's another figure from the New York Times series. This is from the 1930s, as you can see, and the accompanying text, again, taken from the New York Times. Federal law that makes possession of marijuana a crime has its origins in legislation that was passed in an atmosphere of hysteria during the 1930s, firmly rooted in prejudice, racial prejudice. And this racially freighted history lives on in current federal policy driven by myth and propaganda, almost impervious to reason. But as we see from the previous slide, among the general population, the more enlightened attitudes have finally come to prevail. But yet, there are still pockets of resistance to reason. And myth and propaganda live on here in Alaska in some of the messaging of our opponents. Examples that we'll be talking about, I'm sure, focusing on outsiders rather than acknowledging the local roots of our campaign like I was just talking about. Failing to acknowledge that marijuana is far, far safer than alcohol, both for the individual and for society. We'll talk about this at great length. Our opponents suggest that legalization will lead to great increases in use. In fact, if you've got one of these flyers from their table, you can follow along with these examples of myths and misinformation. In fact, the best evidence suggests that liberalization of marijuana policy does not lead to increases in youth, both among adults and teens. Our opponents compare marijuana to tobacco, again, with no basis. We'll talk about all of these claims. I guess I need to hurry up. I'm down to 2 minutes here. Comparing marijuana to crack cocaine, again, hardly a word comment. The initiative's local option we'll talk about. It's clearly misrepresented in their literature here. And some other things straight out of the past. Alcohol versus marijuana. I think all of us recognize the truths of these. I'm going to hurry up really quickly through this. Dave Nutt is one of my heroes, another academic researcher who has stepped to the lead. And let me go back here. Analyzing really objectively looking at the difference between alcohol and marijuana. And with this detailed analysis, his team came up with, it's hard to read, alcohol on the left in terms of harm, both to the individual and to society, and cannabis much lower on the right. Again, an objective analysis. I'm afraid I'm running out of time, and I'm going to have to go really quick, but I just want to say a couple things. Regulation is working in Colorado. Our opponents say we have to wait. No, the evidence is in. It's pretty clear. We'll be talking more about this. A recent report by the Brookings Institution, a very impartial source, says that Colorado is doing it right. So we clearly have a good example to follow there. The New York Times agrees that regulation is working in Colorado. And in Washington State, the Seattle Police Department says not much has changed since the passage of their initiative. So that's just an introduction to what I expect we'll be talking about in more detail through the remainder of the evening. Thank you.
Tim, thank you very much. Now let's hear from Deborah Williams.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. This is such an important forum, and we do want to thank Alaska Common Ground for doing these forums because in November, we are legislators. We are going to decide yes or no on a very specific piece of legislation. And so what I want to talk about and what we want to talk about is the piece of legislation that you, as the citizens, are being asked to vote on. And let you decide, after you know more about this legislation, whether it is something that you want to vote for or against. This ballot measure is extreme and costly. I've been in Alaska over 35 years. I have taken loved ones to the emergency room in psychosis from marijuana. I have seen other impacts from marijuana, and we'll talk about the science behind that. It's a shame to laugh about that because I can't tell you how many people come up to me and talk to me about issues that they've had associated with loved ones and the marijuana we're talking about today. So this is what marijuana is today. There are a lot of people here who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. What we know is that marijuana back in 1976 had an average THC level, which we all understand is the psychoactive aspect of marijuana, of 0.9%. That was the marijuana that a lot of people in this room were exposed to in college. In 1992, the average was 3.08%. The concentration of just leafy green marijuana on average is 12.3% now. So that represents, as you can see, an 800% increase from the 70s. But of course, as some people in this room may know, but not everyone, you can get marijuana, just go online, look at high concentration marijuana, and I dare say, this is not make-believe. This is an actual brand name of marijuana, green crack. You can go online, Google green crack, and find all the specifics of this marijuana. And marijuana now, you can get strains, leafy strains, of 37.2%. It's a very different product than it was before. But what's even more different, and what makes this particular initiative that you're being asked to vote for so extreme, is the extraordinarily extreme definitions. This is how this initiative defines marijuana. Marijuana means all parts of the plant, the resin's extracted from any part of the plant, and every compound, manufacture, salt, derivative, mixture, or preparation of the plant, its seeds or its resin, including marijuana concentrate. Again, we urge every single voter to Google shatter, crumble, wax, and butane hash oil. Marijuana concentrate, which this legislation that you're being asked to vote on specifically protects, can be up to 80 to 90% THC. This is the reality of the new marijuana. And the other reality, of course, is edibles. Gummy bears, some gummy bears have 4 doses in them, like the gummy bears shown here. And of course, the edibles like the Kit Kat bars. But we urge you all to look at these. Now, if you, again, go on Google or YouTube or anything else and look at, how to smoke wax, how to smoke oil, butane hash oil. By the way, see where 710 is now? If you're in, you know that 710, and you flip it upside down, means oil. This is the new oil. It's not 420 anymore, it's 710. 710 oil. Dab safely, again, go on Google. This was at the convenience, dab safely. Cannabis extracts, concentrates, or dabs are extremely strong. Sit down when dabbing, drink water, call for an EMT if you need help. You'll see YouTube after YouTube of people, going into psychosis or falling down when dabbing. What's important about this is what this initiative, extreme initiative, specifically protects and defines. And then there are marijuana accessories. Again, this initiative, and you'll notice in both this one, where you can barely see the language, but shall not, there's so many shells and shall nots in here, and as a lawyer, I know when you have shells and shells not, there's not a lot of discretion. Be an offense to possess, transport, give to others 1 ounce of marijuana. Again, 1 ounce is 28 grams, a tremendous amount of concentrates, a tremendous amount. And then marijuana accessories. This is how this initiative that you're being asked to vote on defines marijuana accessories. It means any equipment, products, or materials of any kind which are used in vaporizing or containing marijuana for ingesting, inhaling, or otherwise introducing marijuana into the body. Again, go on Google and look at some of the delivery devices now. You're starting to hear about vaping nicotine. Vaping marijuana concentrates is huge. And what are the delivery devices that this particular piece of legislation specifically protects? Things like these highlighter pens, which are vape pens, but look like highlighter pens. Mascara containers that look like mascara, but are mascara vape pens. And all of these other items. What you use to dab is blowtorches. You take this device, you have this, metal on the top, and you hit your blowtorch until it's blowing hot, put a dab on. All the blowtorches, the device, everything is very explicitly protected in this extreme thing. And of course, then you start getting all of these, articles and experiences and, data out of Colorado. National Public Radio, pot smoke and mirrors, vaporized pens hide marijuana use. Students find way to secretly smoke marijuana in class. They're doing that. I'm going to go through these very quickly. Of course, I think everyone in this room knows that 2 people have died in Colorado after consuming edibles. This is, the psychosis, scientists after scientists and study after study showing the relationship between marijuana and psychosis. Impact on fetal brains from marijuana. Average IQ loss in one of the most extraordinary studies ever. 8 IQ points on average lost by marijuana users.
Deborah, we'll have to stop you right there, okay?
That's right. Thank
Deborah,
you.
thank you very much. Up now is Taylor Bickford. Taylor?
So I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight and taking time to come learn more about this important issue. I'm a lifelong Alaskan. I grew up in Anchorage and I went to high school here. I left for about 6-7 years between college and starting work, and I moved back in 2009. Shortly after that, I met my wife, Danny, who's somewhere around here. We got married, and we're raising our 8-month-old daughter here in Alaska. And like anyone who's lived in this state for any period of time knows, marijuana is here already. It's nothing new. We actually have the highest rates of use in the entire country, which equates to roughly 100,000 Alaskans if you take the rates of use and up against our population numbers. So this is really important for a couple of reasons. First of all, if marijuana is so dangerous, and if you take Deborah and Kristina's claims at face value, then you have to ask yourself, why aren't we seeing widespread problems currently? And secondly, we know that there is a massive multi-million-dollar marijuana industry that already exists in this state. The difference is between our marijuana industry and the marijuana industry that exists in Colorado is that ours is run by criminals and it's run entirely in the underground market. And so the question is not, should people use marijuana? That's an individual decision that people ultimately are going to make for themselves, regardless of its legality. The question is, should we leave this industry in the hands of criminals in the underground market, or should we move it into a regulated environment so that it can be taxed and regulated just like alcohol? I want to touch back on some points that Tim made in looking at the origins of prohibition. Harry Anslinger was the federal chief of the Narcotics Bureau, and he said that marijuana leads to pacifism and communist brainwashing. That the primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effect on the degenerate races. That you smoke a joint and you're likely to kill your brother. And that reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men. So this is the history of marijuana prohibition. It wasn't made illegal because of public health reasons or because of research. It was made illegal because of ignorance and racism. Unfortunately, we've seen some of these trends continue today. It's easy to look at statements like that and think these are just a product, an antiquated product of a bygone era, but this quote is from 1986, and this is the White House drug czar, who says that marijuana leads to homosexuality and therefore to AIDS. In 2014, our DEA administrator in DC holds the position that marijuana is equally as harmful as heroin, methamphetamine, and crack. And so, again, what we're talking about is prohibition versus regulation. That's the key question here. And the effects of prohibition on this country have been incredibly destructive. It hasn't stopped anyone from using it. All we've done is created a whole host of new problems, no different than with alcohol prohibition. Milton Friedman and about 500 economists a few years ago determined that we're spending nearly $8 billion a year on the enforcement of marijuana prohibition. Between 2001 and 2010, nationally, we arrest 7 million people for simply possessing marijuana, which is about one arrest every 37 seconds. And obviously, this is happening on a smaller scale in Alaska because we're a smaller state, but it's absolutely happening here. This is Chief Justice Walter Carpenetti in the most recent marijuana Supreme Court case, who says that while the danger of federal prosecution for marijuana is vanishingly low, the danger of state prosecution for simple marijuana possession is real and substantially higher. The ACLU The ACLU says that we arrest Alaskan about every 4.5 hours simply for possessing marijuana. We know that the impact of that is that there's a huge racial disparity in those arrests. African Americans are 1.6 times more likely in this state to be arrested. The overwhelming majority of drug arrests in the state are for marijuana possession. 81% of all of our drug arrests are for marijuana possession, which is the highest rate in the country. And this is extremely costly. We're not spending $8 billion a year because this is the state of Alaska, not the federal government. But we're spending somewhere between $8 million and $14 million a year on the enforcement of marijuana possession laws alone. And so, continuing with this failed policy and thinking that we're going to get a different result, that people are going to stop using it, that we're somehow going to start protecting teens who currently have the best access of marijuana of any age group, and continuing with this failed policy is the equivalent of burying your head in the sand on the beach and hoping the tide doesn't come in. So what we're talking about is a more sensible approach that protects the public safety of Alaskans, that moves this industry in a regulated environment. And I wanted to spend a second here talking about what the initiative actually does. You saw a lot of pictures and assumptions that are being made by Kristina and Deborah about what the initiative does. The fact is, the initiative sets up a framework to regulate and tax marijuana like alcohol. And as soon as the initiative passes, the clock will start ticking on a 9-month rulemaking period. During that rulemaking period, our regulatory board will have broad authority over labeling requirements, making sure that things are properly labeled, that they're not attractive to children. They'll have broad authority to place restrictions on advertising. This idea that we're going to have rampant advertising of marijuana, that we're going to have aggressive advertising of marijuana to children, is completely ridiculous. Our policymakers are not going to let that happen, and the rules will be set up very strictly to make sure that that isn't allowed. And so what Deborah and Kristina are doing is they're taking isolated parts of the initiative, they're drawing them to their logical extremes, which is essentially the tack that the prohibitionist side of this movement has taken for nearly 80 years. And so, again, I just hope that tonight we can focus the discussion not on marijuana use, because that's going to happen no matter how you vote in November. The question is, what do we do with this industry? Do we continue allowing criminal organizations in the underground market to control it, just like we did during alcohol prohibition? Or do we take the reasonable step that other states have taken, and understanding that this is an objectively safer substance than alcohol, and understanding that there's no logical reason why we can't regulate it in a similar way?
Taylor, thank you. Let's hear now from Kristina Woolston.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. Every day we talk to Alaskans who, no matter how they feel about marijuana, are shocked at how extreme this measure is for Alaska. They wonder why the Marijuana Policy Project, a DC-based organization, is spending so much time and effort in Alaska. They don't really have our best interests at heart. For them, this is a for-profit industry that they are investing heavily in. And by telling us over and over again that their drug is safe, the proponents of this measure continue to discount the human toll at the hand of marijuana. I'm from a small rural village in southwest Alaska, and I have seen firsthand the effects of substance abuse. Alcohol, marijuana, meth, and other drugs that are, that are choking the life out of our communities. It affects our community, it affects our health, it affects our productivity and our youth, and these are all communities that are being decimated by substances. Proponents of this measure continue to compare marijuana to alcohol, as if to suggest that by legalizing marijuana, our problems with alcohol will disappear. But legalizing marijuana doesn't eliminate our scourge in our communities with alcohol. It just vastly expands another substance that causes its own set of very serious problems. Proponents keep saying that there will be a local option. Yes, communities can stop pot stores from opening up in their communities, but they can't stop from bringing in marijuana, even in communities that have banned alcohol. If this measure passes, marijuana will be many times easier to get, and rural Alaska's struggle with substance abuse will only get worse. There is a quote recently from the Attorney General from the Oglala Sioux tribe in South Dakota, and this is on the Pine Ridge Reservation, about a 7-hour drive from Denver. She said, "Our youth are abusing marijuana as never before. This stuff they're smoking and eating comes still in its packages from Denver." When proponents tell you marijuana is safer than alcohol, what they really want you to hear, and what our kids hear, is that marijuana is safe. That is how you grow your customer base in a for-profit industry. Now, they keep saying that marijuana is already here and it's everywhere and kids can already get it. And we realize that. It's not about prohibition. And recently I heard a quip that perhaps it's the gateway to the White House. But my son was in the audience when that statement was made. And while it was a joke and it got some good laughs, I don't think it's responsible for us to convey a message to our kids that you can be successful in life and perhaps reach the White House because of a drug. It's symbolic of this lower 48 effort to aggressively expand an industry that is not interested in what's best for Alaska. And I'm not ready to give up on our kids just because some are already using it. We want to make this very clear, and we come at this from a place of great concern and not from prohibition. We know it's here. But marijuana is not safe. And Deborah listed some of the many health effects, but here's a couple more. Independent researchers have determined that using marijuana doubles your chances of a car accident. If marijuana becomes more widely available, stone driving would increase. And we need only to look at Colorado. You know, Colorado has been expanding its marijuana laws since 2006. This wasn't an overnight turn on the spigot like it would be in Alaska. They legalized medical marijuana in 2006, and between 2006 and 2011, the number of fatalities involving drivers testing positive for marijuana increased 114%. Now, unlike alcohol, for which impairment can be reasonably tested and measured with a breathalyzer, the only valid way to test how stoned a driver truly is with a blood toxicology report, and there's no field sobriety test. The cost to our businesses will go up. The Journal of American Medical Association says workers who test positive for marijuana have 55% more industrial accidents, 85% more injuries, and 75% increase in absenteeism compared to non-users. In Colorado, businesses are already struggling to determine what is an allowable level of THC for an employee to have if they're at work. Do they accurately test for it? How do they accurately test for it? And will they be sued if they discipline an employee for using a legal substance in their personal time, even if THC is still showing up in their blood? These are all valid questions and concerns. This is, I think, are we having trouble? Oh, yep, bottom left. This is a map of the pot stores in Denver, where they now have more pot stores than they do alcohol stores and pharmacies. And the other slides are what you can expect to see if this measure passes. There will be pervasive advertising. I know that Taylor said that we can just wish that away, but that's not the reality, and it certainly is not the case in Colorado. There will be pervasive advertising, and it's intended to convince us that marijuana is safe. Advertising that encourages people to use new products, try the latest marijuana edible or concentrate, and advertising and packaging that is in fact at times appealing to kids. And if you think we're exaggerating, well, it's already here. You may have seen their bus signs all over Anchorage, and the message is clear. They want us to believe marijuana is safe. Now, are there issues with how we deal with marijuana as Alaskans? Yes. Should Alaskans come together to solve these challenges? Yes. But should a Washington, D.C. based organization who has said repeatedly that they will do and spend whatever it takes for Alaska to be the next pawn in their national strategy? I don't think so. We're confident Alaskans are seeing through the smoke. A new poll just out yesterday shows for the first time this measure got on the ballot, more Alaskans plan to vote no than yes, 49% to 44%. This is a dramatic 18-point shift in 5 months. The pro-commercialization side touted the February poll as evidence that this vote was a foregone conclusion. Despite being dramatically outspent, our message is getting through, and Alaskans are coming to realize what this extreme measure is all about. Now, we need to watch what the Marijuana Policy Project does next. This is an organization that has repeatedly said they will spend and do whatever it takes to win. And in the last few weeks of the campaign, they will be all over the airwaves trying to convince us and you that marijuana is safe. We are confident that Alaskans have a better vision for our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristina. We've come to the question and answer portion of the program tonight. I want to remind you that we've had folks going around the auditorium, and you could submit your questions to them, and we'll try and read them from up here. And I want to open up with one of the questions. Once again, panelists, we'll alternate back and forth here. Kevin will give you cues as far as the time is concerned. You'll have 2 minutes to answer the question and try and get both sides to answer each question here. This one comes from someone in the crowd. I thought this was a good one to start with. Decriminalization is one thing. Why do you feel it is in Alaska's best interest to create an industry that will be allowed to advertise and promote the increased use of a drug that is only less harmful than alcohol, but not harmless? Taylor, Tim, want to take that?
Just as a basic answer to part of that question, again, the rulemaking process will allow for advertising to be banned. And so, again, part of the problem is Deborah and Kristina have been going around telling people that the initiative automatically leads to aggressive advertising, which just isn't the case. The problem with decriminalization is when you take a product or a substance and you say that you're not going to be arrested for using it, but you set up no legal way for that to be bought or sold, you're maintaining one of the biggest problems of prohibition. It was one of the biggest problems with alcohol prohibition, if not the biggest problem, and it's been one of the biggest problems with marijuana prohibition, and that is that you're empowering the criminal underground. If you look back, say, like the last 10 years in Alaska, and you read through headlines, you're not going to find cases of people committing violent crime after using marijuana or sexual assault or domestic violence. You're going to find cases of people being murdered in the underground marijuana market because of marijuana deals that have gone bad. There was a case in the JCPenney parking lot of a stabbing murder. There was a shooting at the Carlson Center in Fairbanks. And there was a murder in a village over a marijuana deal recently. And so prohibition of marijuana and the empowering of the criminal underground has created far more harm to both Alaska and the country than marijuana itself ever could. I just want to clear up one other point that Deborah and Kristina said multiple times in their presentation, and you're going to hear more tonight. The Marijuana Policy Project is a nonprofit organization. Okay, it's a nonprofit organization. It started in 1995 before there was a single medical marijuana law in the country. It's not a for-profit organization. And this is an attempt by them to just demonize the local activists who are supportive of this issue. The Marijuana Policy Project is set up to end the laws and the harmful policies of prohibition across the country. And they have been working in Alaska with people like Tim and others for nearly 20 years. So again, you're going to hear more of that because it's part of a strategy to execute essentially a character assassination of the local people that support this issue.
Taylor, thank you very much. Deborah, do you want to counter?
Thank you. Advertise, advertise, advertise. Again, we invite you to look at what's going on in Colorado. As Kristina and I showed, there are people on the corner, like the Liberty Tax guy, advertising to buy cheap marijuana here. There are ads in the paper, 3/4 page ads in the Denver Post with cute little doobie figures saying, buy marijuana here. Value packs, you know those package of coupons you get? There are advertisement in value packs. There are advertisements on buses, just like the misleading advertisement that is now on the bus here. It is in your face. It is consume, cheaper price, try this concentrate, try this edible, advertise, buy, and it's attractive to children. Interestingly, when there have been attempts to reduce advertising, there have been lawsuits. So for example, one instance where there are lots of magazines that highly promote marijuana use, the Colorado regulators said, let's put those magazines behind the counter. The marijuana industry said against the First Amendment, and they won. It's fun to see the front of the bar rag. Recreational marijuana will create many new clients. That's the headline. The amount of lawsuits that will occur, and anything that gets close to the First Amendment, you can be assured there will be lawsuits. We are looking at, I was involved in in tobacco in the 80s, and we thought Joe Camel was bad. Colorado has Fred Flintstone, Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse, unbelievable sex, unbelievable advertising. It made tobacco advertising look tame. You are looking at crass commercialization of a product that is harmful and addictive. And you are looking at it being seen by your children, your grandchildren, and yourself.
Deborah, thank you. I don't certainly doubt anything that you just said right now, but I want to go back to this is it a 9-month rulemaking period? Does that necessarily have to happen here if this is approved, or can that be ruled out in this rulemaking period? Could you clarify that?
It 100% can, and anyone who tells you otherwise either is trying to deliberately mislead you or they haven't read the initiative. There's no other option. The rulemaking process actually compels the regulatory board to set restrictions on advertising. Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado came out and said that the experience with the marijuana industry in Colorado is that they've acted extremely responsibly and that they've worked with the state. And so because something happened in Colorado in the first couple months of their legalization of marijuana, that doesn't mean it's going to happen here, and the law specifically sets a framework for those decisions to be made.
So we don't necessarily have to have gummy bears. We don't have to have people in costumes waving marijuana around on street corners.
That can all be banned. The state of Washington, which launched their recreational market a few weeks ago, has already banned gummy bears and lollipops. So through our rulemaking process, we're going to have stakeholders across the state that are going to be engaging with the industry, making suggestions, and if Alaskans want those things banned, then they'll be banned.
Kristina, you want to say something?
Sure. A couple of things. Within Alaska's Constitution, when you have a ballot measure, you are not allowed to repeal any part of that ballot measure for 2 years. And any substantive change within that would be considered repeal, including the definition of the products that are expressly included in the ballot measure. If you do that, you will be open for lawsuit. And that is what is happening in Colorado, and that's what Alaska would be open for. And we would be on the hook for the cost for that. A couple other things is Governor Hinterberger also said everybody else should just wait and see what's going on. And this has been happening for 7 months now. And so I think that we as Alaskans have the opportunity to continue to see what is happening in Colorado and to really learn from that. And we don't need to make a rush judgment on that. The black market is actually thriving in Colorado, and they have a huge export industry of black market marijuana out of Colorado, and they're seeing, the DEA especially is seeing a 5-fold increase in marijuana that's leaving the Colorado border. So it's not going away, it's actually thriving. Deborah, did you want to say something?
I want to point out, first of all, one of the other extreme aspects of this initiative is 9 months. 9 months to go from zero to a full-blown regulatory system. It's taken Washington, the state of Washington, approximately 2 years, and still they don't have their system fully in place. You can't do this in 9 months. Again, one of the extreme provisions. I'm a lawyer. If the statute says X, and the statute defines marijuana the way it defines it, you can't regulate less than what the statute prescribes. So if the statute says marijuana includes every single conceivable product and every way to ingest that product, regulators do not have the ability to minimize that definition. Otherwise, there will be lawsuits and lots of new clients. And again, we invite you to go online and look at what's happening in Colorado and ask yourself, is that what we want for Alaska? You're the lawmaker. You can ask if that's what you see as your Alaska that you love, and we all truly love Alaska.
Deborah, Kristina, thank you very much. Taylor, I see you itching to get in here. Go ahead.
I'll be really quick. One of them just told you there is no 9-month rulemaking process, and the other one told you there is. The fact is there is. Deborah was correct. And if the initiative specifically says, if it specifically says that there will be a rulemaking process and that advertising can be banned and that steps can be taken to prevent diversion to children, then it means exactly what it says. If the state of Washington could ban gummy bears and lollipops and those things, then so can the state of Alaska. And to claim otherwise, again, is either deliberately misleading to voters or it's coming from someone who actually hasn't read the law.
Next question here. You stated that $7.7 billion is being spent now for enforcing prohibition. Any estimates on the cost of enforcement if marijuana is regulated legally? Any answer? Yeah, we'll start. Yeah, you guys can. Let's start.
So obviously the regulatory system will cost some amount of money. The state came out and said that it'll cost maybe $3 to $7 million a year for the first year just to get things established. And the chiefs of police came out and said that it's going to cost them more money to stop arresting people for using marijuana, which I think when most people read that headline, they had the exact same reaction. Obviously, they're spending a lot of money now, and by stopping arresting people for this, you're going to be spending less money. So it'll cost some money to run the regulatory process, but most of that will come from the savings from not having to enforce prohibition anymore. Tim, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Again, all of the estimates that I saw from the state failed to acknowledge at all the revenue that will be gained from taxation.
Kristina?
Thanks. A couple of things. Whenever you legalize a substance, for example, tobacco or alcohol, with any tax revenue comes a cost. And there are hard costs, and then there are costs to society. And what the research has shown is that in our society, when every tax dollar that you receive in tobacco or alcohol, you spend $10 in lost productivity, harm to youth, harm to family, and increased healthcare costs. Now, the hard costs to the state of Alaska, I think they're yet untold, because when you look at Colorado, they really did this over a gradual time frame, and they had some infrastructure set in place when they turned on the recreational faucet in January. But Alaska would be doing this within a 9-month rulemaking process and trying to create an entire bureaucracy and infrastructure. They're going to track every Alaskan who purchases marijuana, when and where and how much in Alaska. That's going to take a significant amount of bureaucracy and tracking. The other thing to recognize is that the chiefs of police have said that this will cost them $6 million to train their officers. We don't have adequate law enforcement in our villages as it is now for the current challenges. This will no doubt cost them more, because when you have a wash of a new product coming in, which has happened in Colorado, they have said that so great is the need and the market that they just can't keep up. And a new term that I learned, which is interdiction, is the marijuana leaving their borders illegally, which the DEA, feds, as well as state law enforcement are having to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to monitor and track. So this will come at great cost.
Okay. Well, unless you can do this really, really quick, Deborah. Like, time's up. Sorry. You were down to seconds here. This one's for Kristina and Deborah. If the law was written to only legalize the plant form and not all the wax, the candy, etc., will you still be against the initiative? Would you still be against it?
It's very appropriate that we're here with Alaska Common Ground, because one thing Alaska Common Ground does is say, let's bring people together and address an issue that's important to our state. I personally believe in decriminalizing marijuana. I don't believe in commercializing, advertising, industrializing marijuana in this state, any more than I believe in commercializing, industrializing gambling. We have a choice. We have the choice here in Alaska of what we want our state to look like. So do I think Common Ground, we certainly hope this extreme, costly law will be defeated by Alaskans. And as Kristina said, the current poll shows that it would go into defeat if it were voted on today. Because we think Alaskans understand, we don't believe in extreme things. We don't believe in in-your-face things. We believe in health. We believe in education. We believe in other things that are very important. And so could we sit down, Alaska Common Ground, convene, and we would join and say, what is an approach that makes sense for Alaska, yes. I can assure you it wouldn't be this extreme MPP approach, but we could come up with an approach. And from my perspective, it would involve decriminalization. And I think that is something to do. It needs to be an Alaska solution for our Alaska situation that makes the most sense for Alaska. This initiative is absolutely not that.
When Deborah and I refer to the Marijuana Policy Project out of DC, it's because this organization is funding this entire effort. They funded the initiative, the ballot signature gathering, and they funded virtually all of the marketing and advertising and well, we'll skip that word.
Kristina, we have to stop you there, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, that's okay,
Out of
thanks.
time there, thanks.
That's,
Taylor, Tim, you want to say anything here on this?
What Deborah just described to you essentially is that she supports people using marijuana, but she thinks criminals in the underground market should have control of the industry, and that it should be totally unregulated, and that people should be forced to criminalize themselves in order to obtain it, which is a system that doesn't make any sense at all. They keep calling the initiative extreme, and they keep referring to the definition of marijuana as extreme. What they're not telling you is that the definition of marijuana in this initiative is the same definition that is being used in Washington and the same definition that's being used in Colorado. I have an article in my stack here somewhere. Washington, when they first passed their law, they had a much more limited definition of marijuana. Their legislature and their regulators and their policymakers specifically went back to change the definition to include things like concentrates. It was overwhelmingly passed in the legislature. And the reason for that is if you don't include those things in the definition, they're just going to be produced in the underground market. They're going to be produced by criminals. It's going to be incredibly dangerous. And so Washington actually specifically changed their definition to go to this. So this isn't extreme. This isn't something new. This is something that exists both in Washington and Colorado.
Tim, you want to add anything? Did you have some time?
I just wanted to comment on something that Kristina said a couple times now, lumping alcohol together with marijuana. She first mentioned it in the context of problems in the villages. You cannot lump these substances together and consider the problems of alcohol and attribute them to marijuana. And then when she was talking about the $10 cost to $1 of revenue raised, again, that is something that applies only to alcohol abuse and its problems. Marijuana is a much safer product, and there's no reason to project that the costs of treating marijuana abuse would be anywhere near that.
Tim, thank you. If we could hold, if you don't mind, if we could hold applause and some of the comments I'm hearing, if you could hold those towards the end, that'd be great. More time for our panelists here. One of the questions that I have is that, by my calculations, whatever this is worth, if this passes, Alaska would be the third state, Colorado, Washington, Alaska, to legalize. Why now? Why not wait to see just how things pan out in Colorado and in Washington state? Is there, do we need to do this soon? So Tim?
We've already waited. We've waited for many years to see the effects of prohibition. I don't think we need to wait a minute longer to see how detrimental that has. With regard to the new policies in Colorado and Washington, they are, as we've just described to you, things are working well, except for the isolated examples that our opponents keep harping on. Out of the millions of people who are using marijuana in those states, the number of examples that they can find where there have been negative effects are really quite small. So we'll have 9 more months after the initiative passes here to continue to observe and engage in appropriate rulemaking. So no, I think the time is right. I don't think we need to wait any longer.
Kristina?
thanks. Well, we're not actually trying to compare alcohol to marijuana. I mean, that's the whole point, right? We realize we want to take marijuana on its face value and the consequences that are associated with legalizing and commercializing a substance. Alaskan villages have a terrible problem with suicide. And one of the research studies that they've showed, and they've done a significant amount of research on marijuana impact on youth, and Deborah mentioned the IQ drop. But the American Psychiatric Association said Marijuana use in youth is associated with increased depression, suicidal ideation, use of other substances, and risky behavior among adolescents. We need to look specifically at what this initiative would do for Alaska, and that's what all Alaskans are encouraged to look at.
I believe it was Warren Buffett who said, a smart person learns from their own mistakes. A wise person learns from others. And that is precisely what we should do with respect to Colorado and Washington. We should watch. What are we seeing? Again, you read the newspaper, you read the journals. What did we find just last week? The underground market is thriving in Denver and Colorado, according to the Washington Post's extensive analysis. Crime rate is up 7% in Denver, according to the Comprehensive Review of Crime Statistics. Emergency room visits associated with edibles and other products, particularly with children, are skyrocketing. The issues go on and on. We have a lot to learn from Colorado. We don't need to rush into costly mistakes in Alaska. We need to come together as a state, have a rational, calm conversation about how best to proceed as opposed to this rush to a mistake. Let's not do that.
Deborah, thank you very much then. Taylor, do you
Are
want
we
to add
out of
something to
time?
that?
Are we out of time?
Yeah, you're out of time.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Kristina, but Taylor?
Yeah, I just, again, we've lived with Prohibition for 80 years, and Prohibition has done absolutely nothing to keep marijuana out of the hands of kids. I'm a father, a new father. The last thing I want to see is my young daughter get access to marijuana. But the fact of the matter is, there is no single group in this state or in this country that currently has greater access to marijuana than teens. 80% of high school seniors in any federal survey that's been released over the last 20 years have said that marijuana is easy or very easy to obtain. It's easier for them to obtain than tobacco, alcohol, and other substances which are currently regulated. And so thinking that by continuing with Prohibition, we're somehow going to protect kids from marijuana, again, is like burying your head in the sand and hoping that the tide doesn't come in. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. And the overwhelming majority of evidence suggests that liberalizing marijuana laws, either in this country or elsewhere, does not lead to an increase in teen use. Teens can already get it. If there's going to be any increase in use, it's going to be amongst older people.
Kristina,
I have to respond to Kristina's implication that using marijuana contributes to suicide or causes suicide. I mean, this is just absurd. People who are depressed are more likely to abuse marijuana. People who are depressed are more likely to commit suicide. There is no causal relation between marijuana use and suicide.
Tim, your time's up. Thank you. Kristina, I'm going to give you the final word on this particular go-round. You get the final
Thanks.
word.
Yeah, they got twice, so. I guess the thing that we need to realize is the reason that alcohol and tobacco cost us so much as a society is because they are legalized, because they are prevalent, because they are marketed, because they are advertised, and they are readily available. And the trends that we have seen in marijuana in Colorado and in other places that they have legalized, and it's not just about recreational marijuana that's been legalized. In California, they legalized medical marijuana. I mean, the usage, it is the New England Journal of Medicine is the one that said that when you legalize a substance, that becomes the most prevalent in your society. And when you legalize some substances, the perceived risk to our youth goes down and the use goes up. That's not, an emotional statement on our part. These are studies, these are facts, and I apologize for quoting the American Psychiatric Society and for what they have studied, but these are studies. These are not, okay, I'll stop.
Cannabis sativa, 0 deaths a year, 0 deaths a year.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Denver had an existing medical marijuana infrastructure. How will Alaska meet the challenges of starting from scratch? Jim, Taylor, you want to start off with that?
Well, on the medical issue, I think it's first important to note that we do have a medical marijuana law. It was passed in 1998 by the voters, but we have a few thousand medical patients in this state, and they have no way of obtaining their medicine. We have no dispensaries. The legislature gutted the law. And so If you're a medical marijuana patient in the state, you essentially have to criminalize yourself to obtain the medicine that you've been prescribed to use. There are also a huge segment of people who want to use medical marijuana but can't because they don't qualify under the law. The parameters for qualifying are very specific. For example, soldiers with PTSD, we have a few of those that are part of our coalition. They can't legally use medical marijuana in this state, so the system is totally broken. The fact that Colorado had an existing infrastructure really doesn't matter for Alaska. The fact is we're going to have 9 months to write the rules around this industry, and there's no reason to believe that that can't be done. And obviously, if it needs to take longer, then that's something that the regulatory board or the legislature could consider. It'll launch when it's ready to launch, and I don't think there's any reason to believe that 9 months is not enough time.
Deborah, go ahead. Hold on, please.
One very real reason to believe that 9 months is not enough time is that the state of Washington couldn't do it in 9 months. They couldn't come close to doing it in 9 months. And Washington was closer to our situation than Colorado. Washington was actually more evolved. There is no possible belief or explanation that we could do this in 9 months. Again, that's one of the extreme measures. We would have to rush into making all kinds of bad decisions to meet that 9-month deadline. That's one of the extreme measures, as we pointed out before. I would like to go back and highlight a couple things, and that is the very important evidence that when you legalize, commercialize, advertise a drug, that perceptions of harm go down. And we have Exhibit A right now running around the streets of Anchorage. How many of you have been behind a bus that has a marijuana leaf and the word safe or safer above it? Is that what you want your children to see? And if that is what you want your children to see, then I urge you to read the New England Journal of Medicine about the impacts on marijuana, not only on health, but on education. And what we know, of course, is this just came out, and all of the other evidence that came out. What we know is marijuana is candidly not safe, particularly concentrates, edibles, and 37% THC marijuana. But when the New England Journal of Medicine points out impaired short-term memory, making it difficult to learn and retain information, impaired motor coordination, interfering with driving skills and increasing the risk of injury, altered judgment, increasing the risk of sexual behaviors that facilitate the transmission of sexually transmitted disease. In high doses, paranoia and psychosis. You know, it's amusing that people laugh about very clear, peer-reviewed, absolute definitive science right now.
Deborah?
Anyway.
Time's up. Thanks.
Thank you.
There's an economic side to all of this, too. I'll get into that a little bit, if you don't mind. What will the tax revenue potentially go towards? Does some of it go towards schools in Colorado right now, for instance? Might that be a possibility here? Does the regulatory board decide this? So what kind of revenues do you think can be derived from the legalization of marijuana here? Taylor, if you want to start this up.
Again, the landscape we have in Alaska today is that we have a multi-million-dollar industry here, and it's 100% benefiting the underground market. It's not benefiting Alaskans. We know that marijuana is already here. It's widely used and widely available. So whatever costs are associated with that use, we're already bearing. The difference between us and a state like Washington or Colorado is that we're not, getting any revenue from the market. Colorado has created 10,000 marijuana industry jobs. It's everything from dispensaries to testing facilities and other things. And that's, a lot of jobs. And obviously Alaska would create a smaller number, but a significant number. The Bloomberg recently reported that the state of Washington and that the state of Colorado are going to collect maybe $2 billion for marijuana taxes over the next 5 years. So the state of Alaska recently decided that they aren't going to do an official revenue projection until after the initiative passes. But we know that the revenue opportunity is significant. We also know that Deborah and Kristina's group has put together their own projection, which is literally a back-of-the-napkin equation. It was not done by economists. It was done as a politically motivated exercise to try to convince Alaskans that somehow moving Alaska's biggest cash crop out of the underground market and into a regulated environment would lose the state money, which is so ridiculous on its face that it's almost not even worth responding to. Again, this is a big multi-million-dollar industry. It's already here. And so we have to decide, should that industry continue benefiting the underground market, or should it be used to pay for things like schools, education, drug awareness, education campaigns, and some of the things that they're doing in Colorado?
Taylor, thank you. Kristina?
Sure, thank you. Well, a couple of things about the, at this point it's all conjecture, but when our group and a very respected statistician took a look at what was happening in Colorado, and that's, it's all been compared to Colorado, so that's what we based it on. When you look at the current use of Coloradans at the current tax structure, compare it to Alaska's population, what you get is the number that we have talked about. And that is not an unreasonable number. Now, the yes side has come out with their own study, and it says that Alaskans will use 20% more marijuana than Coloradans. I think that's a pretty large number, but maybe that's the case. At the end of the day, though, Colorado has a 44% reliance on tourists coming to Colorado in urban areas to feed their tax revenue. In the in the rural and the mountain regions, it's 90%. We do not have the ability for tourists to come to Alaska, and Aunt Mildred getting off the cruise ship is probably not here because she's pot curious and bought a $2,000 cruise ship ticket. The reality is that Alaskans' revenues would far underwhelm for the cost that the cost for our state and for our communities to try to regulate and to get our hands around this, something that is, innocuous and not innocuous, but it is subversive because it doesn't even look like a drug anymore. So much of this is a candy or an edible that we don't know is a drug.
We know Alaska Common Ground cares about fiscal responsibility. And again, our analysis showed that the state will lose money if it implements this. That is fiscally irresponsible.
Okay, next question here. Could the decriminalization of marijuana actually increase the likelihood of a drug abuser being able to seek help, seeing how that is currently illegal? Doesn't this influence the user to keep the problem to themselves?
Yeah, I think there's every reason to think that under regulatory framework that people are more likely to seek help for real abuse. I mean, so many people who are referred for abuse under the current scheme of prohibition do not have a medical problem. They have a legal problem. They've been arrested and have been told to get treatment. So that'll go away. Costs related to that will go way down. And there's every reason to think that the cost of actual appropriate treatment for voluntary people seeking help will be lower than what's currently cost under the current mandatory treatment scheme.
Yeah, and again, no one here is claiming that marijuana is totally harmless. Kristina and Deborah have said over and over again that we are telling people marijuana is safe. They're leaving out the final letter of that word, which is safer. We're saying that it's safer than alcohol, which is a position that 75% of Americans hold. The Big Marijuana, Big Mistake group is in the 10 to 15% of Americans or Alaskans that believe marijuana is more dangerous than alcohol. They have a view that, if you did a poll, you'd probably find that 15% of Americans think Barack Obama is an alien. That's how ridiculous this position is, and they want to avoid any discussion of the relative harms of marijuana and alcohol because it totally undercuts all of their arguments against regulating it. It's not debatable. There's no question that marijuana is less harmful, and so currently we know that about 9% or maybe 10% of marijuana users will abuse it. That's going to be the case whether it's legal or not, and under a regulated system, those people that actually need help would feel comfortable getting it, whereas now they have to first admit that they're criminals to even seek help, which prevents many, many people from doing so.
I have to ask this question.
Steve?
Oh, I'm sorry. You had that
Thank
one?
you.
Okay, then I'll ask. Go ahead, Deborah. Sorry.
There is no evidence that legalizing marijuana results in more people seeking treatment. In fact, as Tim mentioned, Many people are now getting treatment because of referrals as a result of their engagement with the legal justice system. And so the short answer is no. If we want treatment, legalization does not lead to that. I actually do want to quote this very important New England Journal of Medicine article, which I think, again, every voter should read, because it just came out last month. However, the effects of a drug, legal or illegal, and the title of this is Adverse Health Effects of Marijuana Use. The effects of a drug, legal or illegal, on individual health are determined not only by its pharmacological properties, but also by its availability and social acceptability, which we're talking about. In this respect, legal drugs, alcohol, and tobacco offer a sobering perspective, accounting for the greatest burden of diseases associated with drugs, not because they are more dangerous than illegal drugs like marijuana, but because their legal status allows for more widespread exposure. And that is our point. It is the widespread exposure that will increase the tremendous burden associated with the adverse impacts of this psychopharmaceutical drug, particularly in its edible, gummy bear, lollipop, and in its concentrate, shatter, wax, crumble state.
15 seconds, Kristina.
Yeah, a study done by ACT Missouri, which is an organization that looks at drug use in youth, came out with a study that said the #1 reason for Coloradan youth for seeking treatment was marijuana. And one of the things that I'd like to say is, despite the fact that a lot of kids can get it, as Taylor said, I think he said 80% of high school students say they can get it. Well, the good thing is they're not. The majority of our youth are not using it, and I think it's incumbent upon us to help them not use it, because we do know the health effects if they do start early.
Kristina, thank you very much. Tim, you have something you want to add to this?
Well, right. I mean, I have to take issue with Deborah's contention that the harm caused by, supposed harm caused by marijuana simply will increase if it's more available. No, drugs have inherent toxic properties. Alcohol is far more toxic. Tobacco causes cancer. Marijuana does not. Just to say that legalizing and regulating marijuana will cause them to be as harmful as these other substances is, again, absurd, no matter what it says in the New England Journal of Medicine.
I believe he had one extra response.
Okay,
if I may.
Close this out.
Again, we talked about marijuana accessories. You don't consume alcohol with blowtorches. We talked about such things as concentrates. You don't see many signs around town saying, sit down, have water available, and call an EMT if you have an adverse impact associated with consuming the substance. The reality of marijuana today, the reality of the marijuana that is defined in this initiative is totally different than the reality of marijuana 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It is what we are saying is clearly harmful. It is the marijuana as defined by this initiative. It is harmful. Its effects, adverse effects, are widely documented. We're seeing the adverse effects in Colorado. That is why it is prudent for us to wait and come up with a specific Alaska solution that avoids these extreme harmful impacts. We can do this. We are smart enough and thoughtful enough in Alaska. We can do this. We don't need lower 48 people spending whatever it takes to get this particular law passed in Alaska. We need to come up with our own solution that is right for our state, that is good for our kids and good for our future.
Deborah, thank you.
There is no DC organization that has said they'll spend whatever it takes. We said, I think actually it was me that said we'll spend whatever it takes. And that's because it's worth any amount of money to end the harmful policy of prohibition, to stop arresting and prosecuting Alaskans simply for using a substance that is less harmful than alcohol.
Okay, if you could hold it down. I'll change the subject here just a little bit. Again, Alaskans, I think it was, again, 1990, we approved a ballot measure allowing for the medicinal use of marijuana. This question comes from a person in the crowd. How else will I legally get this medicine to treat my multiple sclerosis? I'll turn that one over to Kristina and Deborah. That does seem to be an issue here for medicinal marijuana users who legally have the right to use this for medicinal purposes.
Indeed. As I said, we have some issues to discuss in Alaska, and this is one of them. Obviously, people with medical marijuana cards are getting marijuana. We would like to have a discussion to come out with a way that makes the most sense, without escalating that to be the Colorado experience of the incredible amount of advertising, the extreme products, and the extreme activities. And so we believe in that discussion, and that's an important discussion to have. But this is not about medical marijuana. This is about the legalization, commercialization, advertising, and industrialization of marijuana in Alaska. And if we were looking at a different law, that would be a different discussion. But that is not the law we're looking at. We can do better than this law.
Answer the question.
I just did. I did. I said, we have the option right now to do an extreme law. We have the option to sit down as Alaskans and come up with a best way to address that issue. And we do have,
Just hang on, let her
we do
answer
have the
this.
Raven decision. We do have medical marijuana laws. We can come up with the right way to best address that. And so that's what we're saying. We don't have to take this law to address that issue. I and other people commit to sitting down and having that thoughtful discussion. And I would invite Common Ground to help entertain that. It is an important discussion to have, but this is the law that will cause far more harms for this state than will be addressed by coming up with a carefully crafted law that can address that issue without all the harms that this law brings into our state.
Taylor?
I can personally sense the frustration in this room from people who are obviously medical patients who are forced to turn themselves into criminals to obtain their medicine. I see hands being raised, and there's a very palpable sense of frustration. And we have had a reasonable conversation about medical marijuana. That happened in 1998, and the voters said, we want a medical marijuana system. Guess what happened? The legislature gutted it, and we don't have a medical marijuana system today. So we've tried that approach. It hasn't worked. And I think it's really, I don't think it's up to you guys to decide what this initiative means to people. Like any public policy issue, this means different things to different people. And I think if I was a person sitting in the audience who's had to criminalize themselves for however many years to obtain my medicine, I would personally be offended if I was told that this isn't what it's about.
Okay, next question. Will we allow pot gardens at event as we do beer gardens?
We'd have a lot less violence and, as a result, if that were the case.
Go ahead, Kristina.
Thank you. In the case of California, in 1998 or 1996, I believe, I apologize for not having that exact year, Colorado allowed for medical marijuana, and they opened up cannabis clubs and medical marijuana dispensaries. And the violence statement is actually not what they saw in California. There was a 200% increase in robberies in and around cannabis clubs. There was a 56% increase in aggravated assaults. So I think that we do need to have a thoughtful conversation around this, but it doesn't come without some sort of societal cost to us when you change a society that much. Now, there is, as Deborah said, a reasonable conversation to have about decriminalization and medical marijuana. But what this bill is it is a retail operation in Alaska. And that's the fact of it. It is a for-profit industry that is funded by an outside organization that looks to include the advertising and the marketing of a retail industry. And in Alaska, the tobacco industry, despite being precluded and prohibited from marketing and advertising, spends $180 million a year in pretty pictures and advertising in any convenience store in Alaska. I just saw one in Dillingham the other week. And so we are kidding ourselves if we think that this industry that self-reported by the Marijuana Policy Project and others that are investing in it see this as a multi-billion-dollar industry that they're not going to advertise and promote their products.
Kristina, thank you very much. Back to THC levels. We talked about that earlier in the evening. One of the members of our audience wants to know if marijuana is legalized, would we regulate THC levels, or would they be on packaging, I guess, so you knew exactly what you would be getting? Would THC levels be on packages? Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yes, absolutely, and that is one of the major benefits of regulation, is just as with alcohol. How would you like to have to buy your alcohol, like in the old days, in an unlabeled mason jar and just have to guess what the heck was in it? You know, having quality control, having independent laboratories testing all of these items will be one of the biggest benefits of regulation.
Deborah?
One of the challenges, of course, that is being faced in Colorado is that edibles, you saw that picture of the Klondike bar and the Heath bar and the, various kinds of candies, the gummy bears, the cotton candy, the caramel corn, the unbelievable products so attractive to children, that there are multiple doses in those. So like the Klondike bar has 4 doses. I think many of you read Maureen Dowd's piece, and with edibles, of course, there's a very delayed reaction. So even with labeling and what you find, and how many of us don't like to look at the label to see how many calories and how many servings in a certain category of thing. Even with labeling, there are all kinds of issues. And then, of course, once a product like the gummy bears or the candy bars or other things are outside of the packaging and available to children, and of course there are lots of reports in Colorado about young children bringing edibles to school and so forth because they don't know they're edibles. How do you tell if that gummy bear has 4 servings of THC in it or none? How do you tell if that Klondike bar or that candy bar or other things outside of the packaging? And so there are really serious problems associated with labeling. And labeling is very challenging with respect to obviously the concentrates, labeling dabs and labeling shatter and labeling crumble and labeling earwax. And so labeling is not a panacea by any means, especially for children, especially when it's out of the package, and especially when you're dealing with the products that you're dealing with.
Okay. Deborah, thank you very much. How much does the law enforcement activities and imprisonment of violators cost the state now when it comes to marijuana?
Well, according to the American Civil Liberties Union, the enforcement of marijuana possession laws alone cost the state somewhere between $8 and $14 million. Of course, that's not the whole story, but that's a lot of money. And so what we know is that thousands of Alaskans are being arrested a year simply for possessing marijuana. And I think, it's really interesting. You've seen how this movement has progressed over the years. And for a very long time, groups that opposed marijuana did so because of the potential impacts of smoking. That was their big sticking point. And so the industry presented options like edibles, like marijuana brownies have been around for a long time, but they presented these options and now they're against those. And because they have a fundamental belief that responsible adults in the state should not be able to make reasonable decisions about how to live their lives, and that if they choose to use marijuana instead of alcohol, they should be arrested. And that's what's happening in this state. And so it doesn't matter how this debate evolves because there's this core belief that people should not be able to make these decisions for themselves. And I think that runs counter to the very spirit that the state was built on. It's ultimately up to people to decide if they want to do these things. The government can't tell them not to. They've tried for 80 years and it hasn't worked. So why do we think that by continuing with this policy that we're somehow going to discourage people from doing these things? We're not. All we're going to do is continue wasting law enforcement and government resources on prohibition, and we're going to continue handing control of this industry over to criminals, which has been incredibly destructive, has led to countless murders in Alaska, countless deaths outside of this state. And we can't have a reasonable discussion about these issues because we have a very fundamental disagreement over whether or not people should have personal freedom and liberty to make decisions about their own lives.
Kristina, go ahead.
Could you repeat the question again?
Sure.
Thanks.
Let me see if I can find it. I threw it on my pile here.
No, I don't think that, or it doesn't eat into our time, does it?
I don't know. How much does what does it cost to enforce the laws now regarding marijuana and the cost of imprisonment to violators? The cost of imprisoning.
Okay, so I'll let Deborah say something after me, but the Alaska Association of Chiefs of Police recently took great care in weeding through all of the arrests and the subsequent incarcerations, and arrests do not equal incarceration. And what they found was that all but a handful of Alaskans who were in jail would be in jail for other things that were much more severe. They are not beating down the door of Alaskans' homes. They are not seeking out Alaskans for minor possession of marijuana. That is just not the case. And they've actually said just one individual who is in prison at this point would be there strictly for marijuana possession. And so we need to look at the numbers that are being put out by the Alaska Association of Chiefs of Police to get a real sense of what that breakdown is, because what is being portrayed is not, in fact, reality, according to the Chiefs of Police.
The Department of Corrections testified at a hearing in Juneau, and their testimony was that there would be no savings whatsoever to the Department of Corrections associated with this bill, i.e. there wouldn't be fewer people in. One thing we failed to discuss, of course, is that, as we mentioned before, in Colorado, the illegal underground market is thriving. And sadly and ironically, it is especially thriving in underprivileged and diverse communities. That's where it's thriving. We urge you to read the Washington Post story. The other aspect of the underground market that will tragically thrive is sales to people under 21 years old. That market will not go away. And so there will be the need, obviously, for enforcement. And as I said, and as Kristina said, the costs that we hear from Department of Corrections, from the Alaska State Chiefs of Police and others, is that costs will either not change or go up associated with the passage of legalization.
Deborah, thank you very much. Taylor, you want to add something?
Yeah, she's focusing on one department. But again, the American Civil Liberties Union says that the state is spending between $8 and $14 million on the enforcement of marijuana possession laws alone. I think that it's, being arrested in this state, oh, you're just arrested, you're not going to jail. That's not, I don't think, very comforting to the people that are being arrested simply for using a substance that's safer than alcohol. When you get arrested in this state, it impacts your life in some very serious ways. Alaska has some of the biggest problems with collateral damage with any interaction with the justice system. And so this idea that the state isn't going to save money by arresting people for using marijuana is, of course, ridiculous. And again, the American Civil Liberties Union says we're spending between $8 million and $14 million a year on the enforcement of possession laws alone.
Deborah, you get the final word on this.
Thank you so much. As we have mentioned before, it is very important to remember that the costs associated with something like this are dependent on the perception of risk and other things. We've talked a lot about the risk, we've talked a lot about the science associated with marijuana, particularly edibles and concentrates. How often do we see an alcohol, gummy bear alcohol, or how often do we see nicotine, Reese's peanut butter nicotine cups? How often do we see concentrates such as we've seen? We don't. But here is the other thing that really bears repeating with respect to costs, and we urge all of you to go online and look at the state of Alaska's costs. And there are a long series of costs that include everything from increased child support services, increased, of course, enforcement, both within the state and outside the state, and other things. It's a long list of all of the costs that the state is saying will be imposed on the state if this is passed. We would invite you to look at that and what the chiefs of police said, as opposed to an ACLU analysis. I would like to say one thing, and this is important. You know, Taylor is talking about, you know, individual rights and so forth. If you believe in legalizing all drugs, you have a position of, you know, integrity, and you will vote the way you vote. If you believe that our society, when it legalizes a substance, you know, gets a lot of additional costs because of the advertising, the commercialization, the change in risk behavior, and so forth, then you have to decide where to draw the line. And we believe that the science and the experience in Colorado and our good judgment as Alaskans, where we care about our health and our safety and our children and our future, is you draw the line and you don't have a second addictive psychoactive substance that you then impose all the costs on society with.
Deborah, thank you very much. In the initiative, clarify this, perhaps we spoke about it earlier and I may have missed it. This isn't a one-size-fits-all initiative. Explain the aspect of some communities can opt out of this thing. If it's legalized, can some communities say, we don't want to legalize, or is it, once it's passed, everybody's got to do this?
According to the, straight from the Division of Elections website summary of this, local option, the bill would allow a local government to prohibit the operation of marijuana-related entities. A local government could do that by enacting an ordinance or through voter initiative. The ordinances could cover the time, place, manner, and registration of a marijuana entity's operation. Now, concerning the misinformation that our opposition is saying about the local option, they're saying that, as written, the initiative specifically allows individuals to transport and possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana anywhere and everywhere in Alaska. The fact is that it's not the initiative that allows that, it's the Alaska Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court that allows Alaskans to possess marijuana in their homes. So let's not confound those things. But yes, local municipalities, local governments have will have the ability to regulate production and sale of marijuana under this initiative.
Yeah, and the system we currently have now is that the federal government has a one-size-fits-all policy for the entire country. And by passing this initiative, we return control of this to the state and to local municipalities. I also think this is a really important discussion to have. This is the longest section of the initiative, and you hear Deborah and Kristina repeatedly saying that this is all about commercialization, this is all about making money. If this was all about commercialization, if this was all about making money, then why can any community in the state ban the industry from their community? In theory, any community in the state could take that action as soon as the initiative passes. What we saw in Colorado is that some decided that it made sense for them and some decided that it didn't. And so what this initiative does is it returns control to the state, to local governments to decide how this industry unfolds specifically for them. And I think we don't get that many opportunities in this state to take back control of important issues from the federal government, and we have a really clear opportunity to do that now. The Eric Holder Justice Department has said that they'll stay out of states and won't interfere with states that have passed their own laws.
Taylor, thank you. Deborah? Hold your applause, please, if you don't mind. Thank you. Deborah?
Local option with respect to alcohol is a very important part of who we are as a state. It gives a lot of authority, we're talking about authority, for communities to say what is best for their community. As you know, local option is 3 options. You can be wet, you can be damp, you can be dry with respect to alcohol. What this initiative prevents is for any community to be dry on marijuana. And not only on marijuana, as the Supreme Court had in front of it in the 1970s, as we saw, but as marijuana is defined in this initiative to include edibles, gummy bears, candy corn, concentrates, shatter, dab, butane hash oil, and so forth. And so this initiative prevents, it specifically says that no communities shall prevent the transport of 1 ounce of marijuana, again, shatter, crumble, earwax, edibles, into their community, or the possession or the transfer of that. And so this eliminates the ability of communities to be dry on marijuana. And I'll let Kristina speak about why Alaska Natives and our extraordinary chair, Mike Williams, and so many other Alaska Natives are coming out against this because they want to preserve that option, particularly with respect to how marijuana is defined in this initiative.
So when we talk about this being about the money, it's not about money for Alaskans, because we know that this is a big industry and they look to make a lot of money wherever they look to legalize. But about the control issue, we as communities would lose control over this in our communities. I mentioned earlier the Oglala Sioux tribe on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and they said it is overwhelming the amount of marijuana coming into their reservation, a 7-hour drive from Denver, and that is exactly what we would see in our villages. You can transport all of the materials to make butane hash oil in a community, but you can't make homebrew. So I think there's an important conversation to have here, and this would adversely and disproportionately impact our rural and our Alaska Native communities.
Taylor, you have a follow-up?
I would just point out that the poll that was commissioned by the Alaska Legislature this spring, that was conducted by a very high-quality local Alaska pollster, who also provides services to the opposition campaign, found that the highest support for this initiative comes from rural Alaska. And so I think that, again, Alaskans understand that marijuana is safer than alcohol, and that's certainly the case for rural Alaskans as well. And the ability of communities to be dry or not is not something that this initiative could have legally done. That's something that has already been decided by the Alaska Supreme Court. And it wasn't just in the 1970s. These cases have been reopened, and there was a big case that was less than 10 years ago was looked at. So this isn't just some antiquated view of the marijuana industry or of marijuana. This is something that's been looked at as recently as, I think, 2006.
Change the subject a little bit. Let's go health-wise here. Does smoking marijuana have a similar effect on a person's lungs as smoking cigarettes? Tim?
That's been looked at very carefully. In fact, one of the scientists, Donald Tashkin at UCLA, who has done the most work on this, initially started out assuming that he would find damage to lungs and he would find increased carcinogenesis in long-term high-level marijuana users. And in fact, after over a decade of research, he came out in about 2006 and said, you know what? We don't find any evidence of cancer or congestive obstructive pulmonary disease in long-term marijuana users, as long as they're not also smoking tobacco cigarettes.
Kristina?
So a study that was compiled in England equated one marijuana joint to roughly 6 tobacco cigarettes. So there are, this was last year, 2012. The carcinogens in a joint are roughly equal or greater than that of a tobacco cigarette. And these are studies that they've done. This isn't anything that I could or would want to make up.
It's simply not true.
But
Let's let her finish, folks. Tim, if you'd let her, she's got her time period. Go ahead.
thank you. What we do know is that the industry has become very good, the big marijuana industry and big tobacco, at advertising that it is either organic, it is about wellness, or it is healthy. It is the same thing the tobacco industry told us decades ago when they advertised, asthma cigarettes or the such. They're the same industry that now has to give money to help us tell you not to smoke. So when we look about trust in an industry and the health impacts, I don't feel like we can trust the very organizations that are making money off of this. When we hear the Marijuana Policy Project tell us that there are no health effects, that it is safer or it is safe, we cannot trust them because they are the ones making money. Their supporters are the ones making money off of this. So I think we need to look at where the source is coming from.
Deborah, 30 seconds.
Very simply, we do urge all Alaskan voters to look at the science and look at the components of marijuana smoke and look at these studies that show clearly symptoms of chronic bronchitis and so forth. And also, one reason to wait is because there's this whole new area of concentrates. And we are not fully aware of all the impacts. One thing, if you go online and look at YouTube, I really urge you to do so, and watch how people cough and, you know, their reaction. We don't know. This is new stuff. This is new territory. All the more reason to wait to make a better informed decision for the future of Alaska and our health.
Thank you, Deborah. Taylor?
I can see Dr. Hinterberger itching to respond, but I just want to say that the big difference between the tobacco industry and the marijuana industry is that the tobacco industry sells a product that kills 500,000 Americans a year. Okay? The chronic use of marijuana leads to 0 deaths in this country. The very premise of big marijuana, big mistake is to try to get you to draw a connection in your head between the marijuana industry and the tobacco industry. It is the definition of fear-mongering. Okay? You cannot compare marijuana to tobacco, and it's widely irresponsible to do so.
Kristina, you get Kristina, you get the final word on this round. Go ahead.
Okay. I think, again, the kind of scoffing at the health impacts and the deaths that have occurred at the hand of marijuana is inconsiderate and insensitive to those that have died as a result. Just last week, a 10-month-old child perished in a car because her dad was inside getting high. I don't think that you can look just at either the fact that it is addictive or that it somehow causes lung cancer, therefore it doesn't have any consequences or any fatalities associated. The driving study in Colorado is a perfect example. We cannot look simply at the factors that are attributed on the yes side.
As I mentioned earlier, I was very involved in tobacco issues in the 1980s. And what we're looking at now with respect to our understanding and knowledge about the health impacts with marijuana is very similar to where we were in the 80s. You'll recall in the 1990s, the tobacco industry was in front of Congress saying tobacco is not addictive. Of course, that was a lie. But I can just say from my experience in looking at all the journals and other people like Dr. Nora Volkov and other people involved in journal after journal after journal, we are on the cusp of understanding the very serious, significant impacts. This is tobacco 20, 30 years ago. And we know the mistake we made there. We don't have to make it again. We don't have to make that mistake again. We can be smarter. And the science is becoming more and more compelling, just like it was with respect to tobacco in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But it took a long time to turn that around and to understand that fully. So we urge you to take a critical, hard look at the science. It is increasing and compelling. Marijuana, particularly concentrates and edibles, are harmful.
Deborah, thank you very much. That brings to a close our question and answer period. We're going to have closing remarks, and Kristina Woolston, you get a chance to start us off. We'll give you 2 minutes to wrap things up for you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here, and this is, as we can see, a very passionate subject to a lot of Alaskans, and I think that that's great. It's a good opportunity for us to come together and discuss and to hear both sides, and I'm just hopeful that we as Alaskans will take a measured approach to this. You know, Colorado took 8 years to get where they are today. California, their governor, Jerry Brown, has said he does not encourage or support full open legalization of marijuana in his state, and they've had medical marijuana since 1996. I think we need to look at the evidence coming out of Colorado and look at the impacts to the community, and we need to see if this is right for Alaska. You know, we need to decide whether, if walking in downtown Anchorage to have lunch, do you want to see a pot store downtown? Do you want to see advertising and prevalent appearances of, you know, cartoon caricatures advertising the latest edible or concentrate? Are these things that we want for our community? Are these things that we want for our kids? And I think that when Alaskans really understand what is in this ballot initiative, and Alaskans are learning more every day, you know, we are seeing the challenges out of Colorado. It is not a rosy picture as has been painted. Crime is up, there are lots of challenges, and the black market is thriving in Colorado despite the wishful thinking that it is not. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I do encourage you, if you have the time, to visit our website, bigmarijuana.bigmistake.org, and please remember to vote in November and August.
Kristina, thank you. Taylor, your turn. Taylor Bickford.
Yeah, just in closing, I just want to say that I'm someone who's been involved in Alaska politics for a long time. I see a lot of people in this room who have been involved in Alaska politics for a lot longer than I have, a lot of smart people. And no matter what ballot initiative it is that we've talked about in the state for the last 20 years, you hear the same message, which is essentially this is too extreme and we need to wait and see, or some form of that. It's a political message. It's not based on good public policy. It's not based on an objective look at the issue. It is simply a political message that political consultants come up with in order to confuse Alaskans into thinking they need to vote no. The reality is we've lived with prohibition for 80 years in this country. We've seen that it has not worked. We've seen that it hasn't stopped anyone from using marijuana. We've seen that it hasn't stopped kids from using marijuana. All it has done is it created other problems, such as the empowerment of the criminal underground, wasted law enforcement resources, the criminalization of medical marijuana patients who just want access to their medicine. And we do not need to wait any longer to see that system has failed and that we have a really, really good example of how to make this work. The state of Colorado is doing it the right way. The state of Washington is doing it the right way. If the picture being painted by Deborah and Kristina were true, you wouldn't have more voters in the state of Colorado supporting the law today than they did in 2012, which is what every major poll that's been released in that state has shown. You wouldn't have the state's top regulators saying that the system is working, that the opposition's fears have turned out to be much ado about nothing. You wouldn't have the Brookings Institution and the New York Times and other independent, respected organizations saying this can work and other states and the country should follow. We have a very unique opportunity in this state to end an incredibly harmful system, to go towards a system that regulates and taxes marijuana like alcohol, and I hope that you all vote yes on November 4th.
Thank you. Deborah Williams, 2 minutes.
Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Steve, for doing a wonderful job moderating. Thank you, Common Ground, for being a tremendously significant forum for not only this issue, but for so many issues in Alaska that we care so deeply about. This is an important vote, and this is a fork in the road with respect to the state. Are we going to choose health and safety, education, our youth's best future, a vision of Alaska that embraces really what we want in terms of vitality and productivity and safety, safety for our businesses, safety for ourselves, safety for others? Are we going to work really hard to reduce harms? Or are we going to embrace this extreme? And I really believe when you read this and think about the debate today, you too will come to the conclusion that this extreme measure to commercialize, advertise, industrialize marijuana, marijuana edibles, marijuana concentrates in Alaska. This is the wrong approach for Alaska. We have a choice about the best Alaska and the best Alaskans we can be, and this is the wrong choice. We urge you to vote no in November, and then let's have a very productive discussion.
Thank you, Deborah. And Tim, you get the last word. Wrap it up.
Well, thanks again for everyone coming here and listening to what we've had to listen to. Frankly, the distortion and misinterpretation of the science that we've had to listen to from our opposition practically leaves me speechless. It's exhausting to me as a scientist to have to put up with it. So I would encourage everyone to, as Taylor was saying, seek out more objective sources of information. If you have not yet had a chance to look at the New York Times, you can look at it for free online for at least a number of viewing sessions before they cut you off. There's been a lot of thoughtful analysis put into that by people who are very objective, very knowledgeable. We have copies of some of those articles available on our table outside. Again, I frankly don't know what more to say. we have a chance to end a policy of prohibition in this state that we have seen, not just in the state, but nationwide, policy of prohibition that has been a failure, has not accomplished what it sets out to do, which is to keep marijuana out of the hands of especially kids. It hasn't done that. So we need to do something else. Let's not be afraid to try something different. Let's not be scared by being hit over the head over and over again with this extreme shatter stuff. It's not about that. It's not about that, despite what our opponents would have you believe. I don't know what more to say. Vote yes on 2 in November.
I want to thank our panelists for spending the last 2 hours with us. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I want to bring up Cliff Grow of Alaska Common Ground.
I want to thank all of you for coming out here tonight. I want to thank our speakers. All our speakers. I want to thank our moderator, Steve McDonald. I want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank our volunteers, and I want to thank you. And like I always say at the end of these things, 2 things. Number 1, I urge you to go on to the www.AK Common Ground website to learn more about our events like this. If you like this, come back again. They're free, as you'll note. And also consider joining our fine organization, which you can see in details on the website and also outside. And then finally, I want each of you to show the same passion, the same attention you had to this event, to all the voting you do, and get out there and vote like you mean it. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen.